y'all, and welcome back to another episode of Office Hours Career Pathways for PhDs. My name is Jasmin Goodman. And of course, I always say I'm excited, but once again, I am excited. We have another great interview for you today. As you know, here at Office Hours, our goal is to make sure that we are just sharing all the different career paths for PhDs. So we're not pro tenure track or pro leaving the academy. Our goal is to make sure that you have what you need to make an informed decision about how you want to leverage your doctorate after graduation. So I am excited to share. Our first guest is Dr. Trevon Swain. He has a PhD in biochemistry from the University of Maryland, College Park. We're going to bring him up to the stage. Dr. Swain, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here today.
Yes, thank you. So we were talking earlier about a small rivalry we have, not quite. He is a graduate of Hampton University, as you all know. As you all can see back here, I went to Howard, but I'm not as fully invested in the Howard versus Hampton. I'll say beef, we'll say rivalry.
Whatever you want to call it, right?
Whatever we want to call it. But we've decided to keep our pettiness to after this conversation, so it won't get in the way of our conversation today. But thank you again for joining us. And I just want to jump right in. I love to learn more about your story. You've shared that you have a very unique story, and our goal is to really highlight that. So tell me, what prompted you to pursue your PhD in biochemistry?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I had my undergrad degree in chemistry from Hampton University. And my senior year, I was like, okay, what am I going to do next? Am I going to go pharmacy school, med school, grad school? There was a lot of different opportunities for me. And I remember spring of my senior year, I went on a graduate college weekend at Georgia Tech. And it was basically just a retreat just for students who may be interested in the graduate school program. We learned a lot about what that looks like, the different programs they offered, STEM, biochemistry, chemistry. And I was like, okay, this could be a path that I want to go down. And so I went down there and I actually met a young lady, I can't think of her name right now, who was in the program. She was like her fourth year in the program, a PhD program down in Georgia Tech. And I was like, how do you like it? I'm excited. I would like to learn more about it. She said, I hate it. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to master out. My PI is not what I wanted to be. This is not the vision I had at all. And I was like, wait a minute. This is not the response I was expecting to hear about somebody who's supposed to be inviting you. It's like an open house weekend to the graduate school program. She said, I just don't have the support I'm looking for. It's mentally draining. I feel like it's toxic. I want to get out. And I was like, okay, that's very interesting. And thank you for sharing your story. So I wanted to take some time to really kind of decide if this is the route I want to go to. So immediately after college, so I graduate, I decided not to apply to any schools. I'm like, okay, if I'm going to go into a program, I need to make sure this is something I want to do. So immediately after, I started to, I did some tutoring at a local charter school around in DC. So I was like, okay, I can get a feel for teaching. This is a little something I want to do. And I started applying for internships. And there was an internship at the FDA. Center of Veterinary Medicine. They were looking for a chemist. It was a 3-year program, and I applied. And I said, okay, I'm going to learn all about it. It's about research. I can kind of hone in my skills. I can decide if this is something I really want to get into. And so got into the program. I was supposed to start in the fall, but with the government, it takes a little longer. So I didn't get into the following spring, which is fine. It just gave me some more time to teach. And so I got into the program. It was supposed to be 3 years. It got cut off after the year. So they actually hired me as a full-time employee. So I was like, okay, this actually works in my favor. So started to work. I was in the lab. I was working with animals, things that I just never thought I was going to see myself as a bench analytical chemist. But it ended up working in my favor. And I really thrived in the area. And it was like veterinary medicine research. And they gave me the opportunity to go back to school. They were like, would you like to pursue a graduate degree? I was like, yeah, sure, why not? You know, this is something I was thinking about, but you're going to have to do the research here on site. It was a lot of different elements in order to get approved, applied, all these different things. And when I initially applied, I wanted just to get my master's. I was like, well, I'm not sure if I'm going to get the full PhD. I'm going to get my master's, and I can decide if this is something I want to continue to do. Especially hearing that horror story, I was like, this is not, I don't want to invest that much time in that. Right. But I had a mentor who said, you know what, you could apply to a PhD program And if you don't like it, you can always master out. It's really the same type of core curriculum and coursework. And if you decide this isn't for you, you can master out. And I was like, okay, that's fine. That works for me. So I ended up applying. I ended up getting in. And then I found myself like 7 years being a full-time employee and a full-time graduate student.
Wow.
So yeah, so
7 years.
yeah, 7 years. So I kind of dragged my feet a little bit because I was looking at it as a sense of, well, I'm still, I still am working for the government. I'm getting my tenure. I'm still having a pretty decent pay for, entry level government position.
Mhm.
And initially, I was contemplating, should I just go to grad school full time or should I try to balance it out? And I was like, well, I could still get the tenure as a government employee. They were offering to pay for our classes and things of that matter. So that kind of worked out. It was just I would have to balance my life between a full-time employee and graduate student and an employee. And so, I had a lot of different layers because my off-campus advisor ended up being my supervisor. So that was some added pressure as well. So like I had to make sure I make my marks in order to get my promotion and grades. So, it was a lot of added pressure, but it ended up working out for me in my favor because if I would have went back, I think my pay would have been cut like nearly in half.
Oh,
And,
wow.
and yeah, and so I was like, well, I'm on the verge of buying a house. I'm already kind of in my career a little bit. I'm starting out. Let me just try to see what I can navigate. And so it took me a little longer,
Mhm.
but COVID hit and it kind of just put things in perspective. I ended up getting married in 2019.
Congrats.
Thank you, appreciate that. And then we were expecting spring of 2020. So I
Wow.
was like, I need to finish this up, wrap this up. And so I ended up defending fall of 2020. So I
Wow.
was I was full-time student, full-time employee, new dad. I'm writing a thesis. I'm preparing to defend. I'm like, I gotta wrap all this stuff up. And so
Mhm.
I ended up wrapping it up. Ended up working out well. I did it, my thesis. As you mentioned before, got a PhD in biochemistry. Really well, I was looking at like different biomolecules that correlate with inflammation in swine. And so
Okay.
it kind of worked out in my favor, got a couple of papers worked out. And I realized at the end of this, and especially with COVID, being in a position in which that you have to be in a lab a lot of times, especially during COVID, I'm like, well, do I want my likelihood and, my marks to be based off of me being present? And so I wanted to kind of pivot and kind of decide on, okay, what does that look like for me? And so after I defended, I started to do a lot of informational interviews. I started reaching out to people on LinkedIn. I went, University of Maryland offered this great program called What Do You Do Now with Your PhD? And it was basically a mini boot camp in which that we had a special advisor in which we went through worksheets to kind of understand transferable skills. What can you do? What type of opportunities? Things beyond just academia, because I think that's what everybody focuses on in PhDs. And
Mhm.
so for myself, the main reason why I got my PhD was really just to stay competitive. I mean, when I had a lot of my bosses who had PhDs, vet degrees, and MBAs, my little bachelor's was not going to hold it in order for me to move
Right.
up. And so long story short, there was a glass ceiling and I needed to figure a way to pivot within my current position. And giving that PhD really opened up a lot of doors and opportunities for me. So long story short, that was the main reason why I got it. It was really just to keep the doors open for myself.
Right. And I'm so happy that you shared a lot of the life stuff that happened. You talked about buying a house, getting married, having a child. Those are the things that I don't think a lot of people realize, that when you're in a doctoral program, life doesn't stop.
Oh
Work
yeah.
stops sometimes. I know for me, I was a full-time student and I would work like adjunct and I would have different part-time jobs, but
Mm.
there's so much life that happens. So how were you able to, I'm not going to say balance, but I'll say manage the responsibilities, because it's important to, move forward with your obligations, but also make sure that mentally, emotionally, and physically you're okay. So what was that process like for you?
Great question. I really had to do some inner work, right? I really had to look into, mental health, really understanding like, am I getting anxiety? Am I missing out on things? FOMO, all these different situations. Because as you mentioned before, life goes on, and so I'm 7 years in. People are, some people already finished some of their, if they were a lawyer, 3 Ls or 3 years are done. They're really, they're really making their way into their own career. So as somebody who's still in this weird situation where I'm working, but I can't really leave because I'm still doing my PhD program. My growth was stunted a little bit. I really had to talk, village. And, the thing about the PhD program, it can range, right? You can be finished in 4 years. You can be finished in 10 years. It all depends on your situation. Mm-hmm. And so that can be mentally draining because everyone's always asking you, when are you going to finish? When are you defending? And you're like, okay, it's a long process. Yeah. And with research, especially STEM, sometimes experiments don't go the way you want it to. And so sometimes it's a lot of writing. It's a lot of, failed experiments. It's a lot of trying to figure out what works best for you and trying to understanding. And it can be a little demanding. And especially when the PhD program, which I kind of consider almost like Shark Tank, in which that you kind of always have to constantly defend your work and prove your worth, it can be very demanding. And so having a village to be around to talk to people about, and talk to about your whole situation really was extremely helpful for me because honestly, it was kind of an isolating situation for me because I was not quite I was a graduate student, but I'm not fully in their lab. I'm working at my job, but nobody's really in the program. They don't really understand what I'm going on with me. So I had to really take some time, to kind of figure out what that looks like and what the support looked like. And so I really had to talk. My wife was extremely helpful for me when I was defending and writing, and even though we had a crying baby and trying to figure that all out, she really allowed me some time to sit down and write. And I had to find tactics that work for me. I realized that, okay, if there's going to be a lot of noise in the house, if I can get 2 hours of peace, maybe I'll put some noise canceling headphones on and really kind of focus in on it. And that kind of worked out for me. But it was really a challenge, and it's still a challenge, right? Trying to balance it all. But ultimately, it worked out in my favor. It's a long process, but for me, you really just got to kind of stay focused on what works best for you and what was your end goal. My goal was to kind of complete this degree and worry about the next step. Because when I came into the program, there was a lot of people who were, brilliant, but they just, the passion wasn't completing the project. They want to move on to something else. They were like, you know what, this is not the path I thought it was going to happen with. I'm just going to industry. I'm a master out. All these different ways to kind of tap into their passion. And so for me, I knew that a goal of mine was to complete this degree in order for me to kind of stay competitive, as I saw as somebody that was currently working. Now, when you go into industry, it's not necessarily, it's not for the position in the government, there's a certain level of education requirement. But in industry, it's not necessarily like that, right? If you're hardworking, if you're a hard worker, if you do great at your work, you're able to still move up in the ranks. But in my previous position, they started to create a line in the sand. They said, well, if you could either do lab work or you got to be a PI or study director. They weren't letting people who were doing lab work to run their own studies. So that kind of created some tension because you could still do method development studies, but you couldn't do research-based projects as somebody who had a non-PhD. And so realizing once again, that's another glass ceiling. And so I had to kind of figure out, how do I leverage my skill set in order for me to kind of continue to stay competitive in this space that we're in right now?
So for you, the motivation was career advancement, and then also being able to just have more income opportunities. What specifically were you interested in terms of a role once you graduated, or was that something that was flexible and kind of nebulous for you?
No, it was. So after I graduated, I'm already at, let's say, I think I'm at 11 years within the government. So I'm halfway done. I'm close to retirement, right? I'm halfway there, right? So I started to do those informational interviews, as I mentioned before. I started reaching out to people in all these different spaces, government, industry, academia. I was calling, asking, okay, different spaces, different fields. I was using LinkedIn. LinkedIn has extremely powerful tools. You can look into people who went to university, what field they're in, what jobs they're in, and you can kind of just see, okay, what path did they take? And I was just reaching out, hey, I'm a recent grad. I would love to learn more about your career story. Can we chat, for 30 minutes? And I realized that people love to talk about themselves, right? And so once you start to ask about their path, I'm not really asking for a favor. I'm not asking for a referral. I'm just really trying to learn more about what was your process behind this? What was your thought? Do you have any ideas? Anybody you can connect me with? And just try to learn more about what their process was, after having a lot of conversations and really think about, okay, I understand like the money's in industry. Should I go there? Now I have my degree. I'm not stuck to this particular tie, to this particular position. What can I do? And after speaking to a lot of people, they were like, well, you already have X amount of years with the government. You can stick around, you can hop around, go to different centers, different organizations. You can kind of build upon that, because then you can always take that to industry, right? So the more you gain, you can kind of just hop around, because you already have the tenure, you already have the experience, and now you just kind of build upon your background. And so that's what I ended up doing. I started applying to different positions. And so I remember I was doing an interview for a consulting gig, and it was like 10 interviews. And I kept interviewing, and I was just like meeting all these different people, which is great. And in the position I'm at now, I had one interview. It was like 30 minutes in and out, and they offered me the position. I was like, I'm not doing any more interviews. I'm going to try this out. And so those are the things you kind of have to figure out what works best for you. And that's kind of the role I'm in now. I got out of the lab. Mm-hmm. I'm now a scientific reviewer for the Center of Tobacco Products. And so I review a lot of tobacco products that come in. Cigars, cigarettes, e-cigarettes, things of that matter that come in. We look at it. We kind of compare what's on the market and to see how much harm they impact, the public health. If it's causing more harm, less harm, those are all things that we just kind of take consideration. And the beauty of this particular position is that I've been fully remote. Now, there are talks about trying to go back, but that's still in talks. But we're currently in a pilot program right now for us to kind of work from home. So it gave me the flexibility to still do what I love, which is science, but be able to work from home and to do it on my computer, my laptop, and, not have to be forced to do research in which I could be working 4 to 5 years on a project and I may hit a dead end. You never know, right? And so like I can actually see the impact I'm having with these applications in real time, which I think is definitely refreshing compared to sometimes you're doing research and you don't know if it's going to be picked up, if it's going to be interest, if people are going to cite you. And so having this flexibility to kind of make your impact, I think is super important. And one thing I did learn in the boot camp, and as I learned informational interviews, I just wanted to operate more in my zone of genius. And I realized that research, though I can do it, it's not my zone of genius. And I'm not super creative, but what I can do is I'm very task oriented, detail oriented. I can look at the problem. I can give my input. I can provide feedback. I can be very personable. I can use those skill sets in order to help other people fulfill, their scientific research as well. And so kind of understanding that was a process in itself, and still I'm learning about it. But I realized, okay, I should lean a little bit more towards that. So what does that look like? And so that's why review work has been extremely helpful for me, because then I can see what applications come in. I can see what looks odd, what doesn't look right. I can give a whole different point of view because I feel like it's a little bit more natural for me. And research I think is definitely exciting and always a next best thing, and it's always great to be a part of it. But as I mentioned before, it can be very demanding. You don't know where your funds are coming from. There's a lot of different factors that go along with this. And so the beauty of this particular position, a lot of our funding comes from Congress as well as application fees from industry as well. So I don't have to worry about grant money. I don't have to worry about when my next paycheck's coming through. And so I think it helps with my work-life balance as well.
Yeah. So this is not on my notes, but are you reviewer 1 or reviewer 2? Like, are you the one that cuts up and hurts feelings? Are you the one that are you causing?
No. So I am reviewer 1 right now. So listen, I'm with the whole process. It's really took me out of my element, because when you do this type of review work, it's not as the same review work as, like, I would say for like a scientific journal. It's more so like policy, right? So it's more of a policy. It's more lighthearted. It's more like, okay, you don't have this information. This is why this information is important. Please provide this information. Get back to us. And so it's very straightforward, and it's not as fluffy as it can be with scientific journals. So it took me some time to adjust, and I'm still adjusting to it. But learning a little bit more about the process, and having great mentors, and they understand there's a learning curve that goes along with it, has been helpful for me in this whole process.
Now, Talk to me about preparing your resume or translating your CV into a resume for government work. What was that process like, since it's still very STEM heavy?
Yeah.
And my assumption is that the language is still the same. Tell me more about CV preparation or resume prep, and then also kind of the language of the role that you're in now.
Yeah, no. There, so within my particular center, CTB, we all actually have um, like a job center resume building email that you can reach out to. You can look at a specific resume, and you can schedule a free 1 hour block of time to say, hey, I need to federalize, as we call my resume,
Okay.
into CV in order for it to be stay competitive. Because within the government, I know everybody dreads USA jobs, but that's really the only way that you can kind of get in there. But you have to realize that it's only matching certain keywords. So you need to make sure your keywords, which are within the CV, are being highlighted, and so that the computer can pick it up in order for it to get to the hiring manager. So reaching out to these different people who are specialists in these particular programs. I remember doing this actual boot camp. We actually had a specialist that came from EPA that said, hey, if you're interested in getting to the government, email me. I'll be able to work with you. We can talk about like how we can transfer your resume. So that's the first step, just kind of understanding what the process looks like, kind of match your resume for what's in that job description in order for you to get picked up. Then you can start talking about different ways, but you got to alter your resume for every job you apply for, because of course there's certain keywords that may be relevant to one job listing, but not the other. And so it is a process. It's not as blanket state. You know, I know everyone says for, you know, resumes, one pager before, but the government, it's an ongoing process in which that you kind of constantly have to update that in order for you to just be picked up. But, you know, I applied to several different jobs. I mean, with the government, you can't just apply for one. You got to apply at least 30, 40 different jobs in order for you to just get picked up and get into the next process. And another thing I would also say is reach out to other people who are in the government. A lot of times there are internal emails that we get that we're looking for people, candidates, you know, for external candidates, but we get internally for people for particular positions. You know, you can look at people who may be center directors or office directors or managers and reach out to them directly. Say, hey, I'm interested in this. Can you pass my resume around? And there's a lot of opportunities that may not be seen, because though the job has to be listed on USA Jobs, there's that time that it's on there can vary on positions. So sometimes that position is going to be there for a week, a couple of days, depending on what, depending on the listing itself. And so as much information as you can get about the position, learn more about it, about the office itself. Also within the FDA, I know there is on LinkedIn, we have a recruitment page that has postings all the time. And sometimes it is through USA Jobs, or sometimes it's provide your resume at this email address, and then if you get to the next process, then they have you uploaded on USA Jobs. So there's different workarounds, but there's multiple different paths. And so just trying to be open, talking to other people in the positions within the government who are in HR, who are in the particular position you're looking for, can be extremely helpful.
Now, with that, what are some skills that you found yourself leaning into in your current role that maybe you didn't think you would have to lean into or leverage or use as much?
So in my current role, I would say project management. I think within research, when you're running a project and you're a study director and you can really kind of leverage, you're kind of like on your own, right? You can go in the lab, you can do what you want, you can kind of see what works, what doesn't, you present your information, you show the results, and it's kind of just almost in a personal silo. But with my particular position, we work with multiple different experts. So I'm a chemist for my current role. I still work with toxicology, I work with project managers. There's a lot of different moving parts, and kind of understanding that not everyone's going to know the chemistry. And so you got to be able to make sure that's digestible for all different experts, and being able to communicate that. And so I had to really step up my oral and written communication skills, because I had to realize I had to tailor it to my new audience. It's not just people who within my field, it's outside my field. So I had to be mindful of that. I have to constantly change it. I have to lose some of the jargon. I wanted to make sure it's, you know, simple, you know, keep it simple as possible for them to kind of understand your point across, and for you to kind of digest with them. But there's a lot of moving parts. There's different reviewers, and different levels in which that you kind of have to make your case for your review, because though you can, you make these suggestions on if this is acceptable or not, or I think there should be added changes, it still has to move up the ranks. And so you can challenge it. You can say, well, I think that this is my stance. I think they need to provide this. Or if management says not, you have to make a case for that. And so you have to constantly, kind of defend your work in a certain way. But you also understand that we're all working as a team. We want to make sure that the products that we are approving or we're denying, we won't have any issues with it, right? Because then legal can come in. And so there's a lot of different ways that you have to be mindful of the work that you do. And so I think that's a big one for sure. It's a lot more teamwork, of course, when you're working with all these different experts. So I think that's a big skill set that I really had to learn about and try to apply, instead of just working on this research island that I was previously.
Now, with that, what would you say, because you had experience working with the government before you graduated, were there any challenges that you experienced once you defended and you were now working full time without, all the restrictions of academia attached to that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some challenges. I think at first, there was some, as I mentioned before, my supervisor was also my advisor. So it was some awkward conversations to kind of figure out, okay, like what's my next step look like? What should it look like? Because of course there's an investment to be like, okay, well, we invested in your education. We kind of want you to stay around here, but I also understand I want you to grow as well. And so there were some tough conversations in which that we need to have some honest conversations about, is there a position for me to grow? How long would that take? And do I stick around? Should I stay? And though I was in this particular position, the position I was at previously wasn't necessarily like a PI research track for me within the government. I was just doing some research work, and I was granted that opportunity because I was in the program. So then I had to wait for another opportunity to come, and I had to figure out what worked best for me and my next steps. And also, the thing is, when you're in a position in which that I wanted to get outside, I wanted to break, I would say, what people viewed me as, because I think it was easy for people just to see me as just bench hands, right? Somebody that worked in a lab. And for me, in order to expand my, really to tap into my professional growth, I wanted to step outside of that in order for them to look at me in a different light, because it would be easy for them to always be like, well, he's my supervisor's graduate student, and so in order for me to be my own, my own person in this research world or science world, I really want to step outside of that. And so that was something that I want to be mindful of. And, I have nothing but love and respect for my previous job. It's just that I need, of course, maybe the door may be open, who knows, but I wanted to go out on my own a little bit to kind of see what does that look like, step outside of just being in a lab, and, what opportunities there for me. Because I think there's a lot of doors that are opening now, especially with a lot of telework opportunities that just weren't there a few years ago. And so now that really you can see the culture shift a little bit more, I wanted to see what that looks like. And so that was a big hurdle for me as well. And so, as I mentioned before, there's glass ceilings. And also I realized there's an art of what I like to call managing up, right? And so a lot of times what I find out in the STEM field over my years is that great scientists don't necessarily make the best managers. And so even though they're great at their research and they're very involved and they're brilliant minds, I think a lot of times they have an issue being great mentors and really trying to grow employees. And, I think that's a struggle that that is going to be a constant battle that I have. And, you got to find that out and try to figure out ways like, how can my manager help me out in a way that's outside of the norm or outside of what they're accustomed to, and kind of challenge them in different ways and say, okay, hey, this is how I'm able to thrive. This is what motivates me. This is my passion. These are ways to tap in. Some people, it may be career growth. Some people it may be, work-life balance. Some people it might be education. There's different ways, but you got to have those conversations for them to understand, because I think they can make a lot of assumptions as well. So I think that was another hurdle as well, like understanding, okay, um, management can be a little tricky, but there's a way that we can work together, and there's a way that we can both feed off each other, and for this relationship to be healthy on both sides. So I think that was a challenge as well.
Okay. Now, our next segment is all about just a day in the life.
Okay.
So you wake up, you do your morning routine,
Right.
you open your computer.
Yeah.
What's happening in the life of a scientific reviewer in your position?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different elements to my job, and so we call kickoff bundles. So we get an application from some tobacco company. Hey, they're trying to get this particular tobacco product approved. It could be a new product. It could be a product that's previously on the market that they're making some changes to, minor changes, and we get a kickoff bundle, and then so you get all the information that is associated with this application, and so then I take time to look at it. I would compare what was the previous tobacco product. What does that look like? Is it on the market? Were there any issues compared to what they're trying to apply with now? Are these changes minor or major? Because if it's a minor change, then it may be it's a little easier for us to process. If it's major, may have to go to different pathways, because there's multiple different pathways in which these particular tobacco products can be approved. And so I spent a lot of my time comparing what are these chemicals within them, the different flavoring, what's the impact does it have on human health. So that could be a long process of just comparing different applications. We're also in different working groups in which that we have to look at, hey, we have different memos that involve, hey, if you're going to be looking at this particular cigar with this length, then you got to take this into consideration. Or if you're looking at e-pens, what does that look like? What's too much flavoring? What's too much of a change? What's a major change like that? Being involved, giving our expertise, doing some research as well. We're doing a lot of, science, we're looking at these different scientific articles, looking at what's the impact of the smoke, of tobacco, of, the different issues. And, we're looking at the change in tobacco because though it's maybe tobacco, the different leaf of the tobacco may have a different impact on the different chemicals, right? And so understanding a lot more of the process, tobacco science, is a lot of the process that we had before. And some of these ingredients can be very complex. There's a lot of changes. Some of these can be a lot simple. It could be just a minor change in which that they maybe are swapping out. They're using a different manufacturer for the leaf of the tobacco or the cigarette paper. And that can be very simple to kind of change. But there's also changes in which they may change a lot of different factors, right? And how it's, the impact that it has on human health is really what we're kind of be concerned about. And so we spend a lot of time looking at and comparing different applications, previous applications. We're looking at stats, we're seeing if this is really a major change, if this could be a minor. We're correlating with these different experts, toxicology. I see this change in this chemical. Does it impact what you're looking at? Does it impact the moisture? Of this cigar? Is this going to, be harmful? Is this going to be an issue down the line? The packaging, if they're changing the packaging, does that also mean that that's going to be added moisture? That means that the actual product may decay quicker. And so all these different things that we have to factor in, and also looking at the testing that they're doing, right? And so does the test actually meet what's necessary, and validating this method? Is this test that was suitable for a cigar, suitable for a cigarette? And so those are the things that we have to kind of be mindful of, and just understanding what's being tested, what's on the market now. Is it validated? Are these methods validated for this particular time frame? Yes, this study was conducted last year, but the method was validated 10 years ago, right? It wasn't reevaluated. Is it current? Does it have the certificate in order for it to be validated? Those are the things we got to take in consideration in order to make sure that the data that we have is great data.
Now, earlier you talked about leaning into your zone of genius,
Yeah.
and that can be a challenging point
Mhm.
because you were in the lab, you know how to do the research, but then realizing that just because I can do this, that
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean that I should be doing this right now or in this way. So let's talk about, what was the process? What was the internal process like for you to come to that decision that yes, I can do this, but I'm going to go this route instead because that's just a better fit for me at this time.
Yeah, I think, I was looking at different ways in which that I can figure out what's my skill set, right? I
Mhm.
understand research, as you mentioned before, but what do I thrive in? What area do I thrive in? And so I looked at um, a basic worksheet of just transferable skills, right? What jumps out to me? And I looked at like the top 4 transferable skills that jumped out to me, and how do I leverage that, and what jobs align with that. And I was looking at different websites. The website called Cheeky Scientists, in which that it's really about just once again try to get people into industry, PhD folks into industry. And so there's a lot of PDFs, workbooks, seminars. There's a book now in which you kind of look into see like, okay, um, how am I able to leverage these skill sets? Because the, I think sometimes with those who come throughout, a PhD program, there is a sense of there's a lack of confidence that's come with that, right? I think because we've been just conditioned in order to kind of always defend ourselves, always make sure. Now, when we're in um, our field specialty amongst our peers, that level of confidence is able to come out, right? You know it. You know a lot about this little portion, but when you start to step outside of that, you got to ask yourself, okay, where is my skill set look like? How do I leverage my skill set? And so just kind of reassuring myself, okay, you belong here. You understand this. There's ways to grow. There is ways for you in order to succeed in this arena, but you got to step outside of your comfort zone. And I had to realize as well, and which I would have done earlier, was just building my brand. And I think that's something I did not do when I was in graduate school. I waited until afterwards. If I wanted, I think I was just so focused on I'm in school, that should be enough, right? And if I would have started building my brand, started making some connections outside of just within my field, talking to people in different fields of different programs, I can get a better understanding of, okay, how do you navigate that? And so like I start to see a lot of people who come from, let's say, lawyers, right? 3Ls, they come out and they have this whole level of confidence. They feel like they can take on the world. I don't think that happens necessarily a lot with people in PhD programs. I feel like it's more of, I'm done. Woo, a sign of relief. Now what now, right? And you want to take some time to kind of relieve. But I think the more that you start to lean into, I'm ready to take over the world. I'm ready to kind of take my next step. I'm ready to have embrace this next layer of this next chapter. I'm excited about that. And if you're around more people who can be excited about that with you, it kind of helps with the process. And so talking to more people about their current situations. And as I mentioned before, I was talking to people in industry, and this guy was like, I got out of college, out of grad school, I joined this startup company. 3 months later, they laid me off. And I was like, okay, this is not, once again, I get all these horror stories, but he was saying, but ultimately I learned a lot. I was able to gain all this skill set. I was able to talk to other people who were in different industries and reach out. And I was able to really kind of grow from that. And I was able to bounce back. But it took a lot of falling, but you got to get back up. And I think that's what, I think that's what we know how to do, right? You're constantly being forced to
Persist.
yes, right, yeah. And so I wish it wasn't always like that, but I think the more that we kind of lean into it and be comfortable being uncomfortable, I think it'll be a lot. I think that's where my growth really came from.
Yeah, and one point that you brought up, I think, is so important. There are so many PhDs that are leaving the academy for their own reasons. We
Mm-hmm.
know what that job market looks like. We know what the income potential and earning potential looks like.
Yeah.
But even with our interview with the previous guest, she talked about how just the volatility of,
Mm-hmm.
corporate work, and you can go, especially in the startup, environment, and you can go work there. And then like you were saying, the person, they didn't have a job within 3 months. That's something, that's a reality that's out there. So it's not even a matter of, the grass is greener. Yes, you can make more money in doing applied research or in commercial research, but there are risks that come along with that. And at least putting yourself out there in terms of, like you said, building your professional brand, getting to know people, having real conversations, and listening when they're saying, hey, this is what I went through, then it at least you're making a more informed decision as you go into these different career paths. So looking back, reflecting on your career to date, what are some things that you wish you would have done either more of or sooner, or just done it all?
Ooh, I think I would have loved to really understand what networking looks like. And I think it took me a while to kind of figure that out. And not just networking in the sense of we're exchanging business cards, but really getting a genuine relationship, because I think that's sometimes I still constantly struggle with that, right? I can meet somebody, we have a great conversation, we connect, and sometimes I don't circle back around. And so understanding that is this a relationship that can work both ways. And, there's been a lot of opportunities I've been able to get as far as speaking engagements, job opportunities, people reached out to me, ways in which collaboration, mentorship, that's a big thing as well. And so networking and mentorship. And I think sometimes we think of mentorship has to be, somebody that's in this well-established field, but mentorship can also come from your peer, right? And so like understanding that, hey, this person was able to leverage their networking, their network to work for them, right? And what does that look like? How do you tap into that? And just understanding that you got to be able to circle back around, understanding that, hey, somebody may be working on a project, ask, follow up, ask how they're doing, figure out what that process looks like. Somebody changed careers, having a brief moment to say, hey, I would love to get some coffee. I'd love to have a virtual chat with you, just to kind of understand, like, why did you pivot? Is there anything you would tell me about? Is anybody can kind of let me know what's ahead of you in this whole process? I think would be a big thing, and just kind of really build upon what everyone always tells you: network. And like it's still a process for me. I'm still learning, and it's unique because with COVID hit, a lot of people would try, but prior to COVID, you would maybe network at these conventions and things of that matter, meetings. And so when you're not in person, it's a lot harder to do that. But you got to be more proactive with that, right? And so that's why you can leverage LinkedIn. That's why you can start making posts, being vulnerable about your honest journey and trying to talk to different people, because I think that would really help you in the long run. And you never know who may see that post or connect with you, and that can help you with your next position as well. So I think just kind of building upon that, I think would have been extremely helpful prior. But I think it's so easy just get caught up with, I'm in a program, that's it right now. I'm really focused on this because that's the only thing I can handle. But the more that you realize that it's more to the program than just your research or your study or your dissertation, it's more about how can I leverage this for my next position. And the more that you realize that, because it'll be easier once you finish on the other side.
Right. And I think that networking gets a bad rap because we've all been in places where somebody's like slinging business cards everywhere.
Right.
This slimy feeling that you don't want to be that person in the room. And what I found for me, being transparent and being authentic and not caring about this person because they work at this company that I want to work for, but caring about them just as a person, just recognizing that they're a person in a role. They, have advice that they can share, and just checking in. Hey, how are you doing? Hope all is well. Just wanting to say, hey, also letting people know about your progress. So if you've made progress from, one conversation to the next, that's always helpful because they want to know that the advice that they've shared with you, that you're putting it into play. And that's something. So I absolutely understand what you're saying about not wanting to network, because as someone that's an extreme introvert, it's exhausting. You have to go, you have to smile at people, you have to talk to everybody.
Yes.
It can be a lot. And so especially if you've spent a lot of your time in a library somewhere behind a computer or like in your lab, having to talk to people in that way can feel a lot. But networking can, if done right, networking can work to your advantage. You have to just make sure that you're being yourself and
Yeah.
that you're making sure that it's a two-way street and you're not just taking from someone, but
Yeah.
you're able to, just share, even if it's just sending a quick note, hope you have a great week, and not being cheesy,
Right.
but just make sure
Right.
it's
Right.
right for the relationship. Okay, with the time that we have left,
Yeah.
if you get, let's say you get a frantic LinkedIn message from someone that's
Okay.
like, I'm about to graduate, I
Yeah.
don't know what I'm doing.
Mhm.
What's one piece of advice you can share? What would you share to with that person to kind of help them through that tough time? Because I've sent many frantic emails myself. So, so I understand that
Yeah.
position, but looking over the trajectory of your career, what advice would you share with the person in that situation?
Um, and just to kind of circle back, I think the two things: continue to build your professional brand on LinkedIn, right? Just constantly, and with LinkedIn, social media, whatever works for you,
Mhm.
and talk to people. Those informational interviews are priceless.
Yeah.
People, like I said before, people love to talk about themselves, and you can gain so much information from just understanding what stage they were at, what they've done, and even if not at their current job, they may be able to help you. Somebody at the previous job may be able to, and just trying to talk to people and understand their career path and figure out what works best for you. Because you'd be surprised how people end up in their particular position, and they go through ups and downs, lefts and rights, different turns, and I think just getting more information about people that are in the field that you're interested in, or you may not even be interested in, or just different people that you can feel as though you can gain some information from, lean into that. And I think that would be the best way. I think, reaching out to LinkedIn is a great step, but having those quick conversations to kind of give you some idea of, okay, what would be my next step, right? And so I think the more you're able to kind of hone in on that, really trying to craft that, you can get your elevator speech together, that 2-minute speech of, hey, this is what I did, this is what I want to do, what's my next steps, what does that look like, really kind of create that will help you tremendously. And you never know where your opportunity comes from. I remember there was this is another reason why I told myself I am going to always leverage my opportunities. I remember I was going into, I think, my junior year in college, and I wanted a lighter workload for the fall. And so I decided to take biology at a local community college in this area. And so I took the course, biology, community college during the summer. I was like, yeah, sure, why not? It's fine. I had a great time. And my professor was like, oh, what do you want to do afterwards? And this is like, oh, I'm thinking about grad school, professional school. I have all these different opportunities. I haven't figured that out. And he was like, okay, well, if you ever, I would love to chat with you. It seems like you're pretty good at the science thing. Why not? Let's chat. And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? Got his information and didn't think twice about it, right? I'm like, okay, it is what it is. Like, I get information all the time. And I'm meeting all these different people. And I was like, okay, sure. All right. And then I started this internship at the FDA. I'm like, okay, great. I'm in here. And I walked past the room, and it's my professor.
Wow.
And I'm like, wait, I didn't know you were working. And he was like, why didn't you let me know? Like, I would have been able to speed up this process.
Mm-hmm.
And from that moment on, I realized you got to capitalize on opportunities. And,
Yeah.
you just never know who's in that room, and you never know how they can help leverage you. And so, that was a big learning lesson for me. You never know who's going to be an advocate for you, who's going to be in those rooms to kind of speak up on your behalf and to make your life a lot easier. But, the more that you lean into it, the more you realize that people are willing to help you, and there's opportunities out there for you.
Yeah, I think that professors as allies, I don't think we have that conversation enough, especially
Oh,
when I taught in undergrad. The students who just kept in contact, and if they needed recommendation letters for many, many different things, I was there
yeah.
because we had that relationship, and they would just either drop by my office. It was never them. It never felt fake or forced.
All
It was
right.
they just kept in contact, and I truly believe that there's so much on the other side of a follow up.
Oh, yeah.
If you just
Yeah.
meet people and just follow up, and even you were talking about LinkedIn, I think it's also helpful to even have a LinkedIn strategy. One thing that I do to build business, if I see someone that views my profile and we might
Yeah.
have similar interests, I'll drop a quick note. Hey, thanks for dropping by my profile, just to share a bit more. So that way, at least I'm able to capitalize on that contact.
Yeah.
And even if, and I've actually won business that way, just by,
Oh, wow.
hey, you view my profile, here's more about what I do. So
Right.
it's important to, come up with a strategy that works best for you in terms of your LinkedIn strategy, in terms of building your professional network. A lot of people that Maryann has found have been people on LinkedIn that are actively talking about their industry. So are you contributing to that conversation? And so that'll
Right.
bring, which we're a growing platform, but we see ourselves as
Right.
being very big one day. But
Yeah.
that's how we found a lot of great people, including yourself, to come on the platform just by them sharing their zone of genius
Yeah.
on social media. So if with the time that we have left, is there anything else that you want to share that maybe we didn't cover? I want to make sure that you are sharing as much as you want to during the time that we have.
Well, just to kind of follow up, as one of my strategies, I always ask, what can I do for you?
Yes.
You brought me onto this platform, which I definitely appreciate, but how can I help you out in this whole process as well?
When I tell you, we would love to hear from more BIPOC PhDs. We want to make
Okay.
sure that if you could share this with your network,
Yeah.
we just want people to know that, one, they're going to be okay. And
Yeah.
two, just breathe through the process and give themselves grace. But also, we just want to make sure that we're amplifying the work that people have already done. So that would be great. And thank you for asking. See, now that's how it works for everyone. That's exactly how it works.
Exactly. Yes. No. And listen, I plan on doing that for sure. I love what you guys are doing here. I love the information. I think it definitely. I wish I just was around prior to when I was going through my process. But you know what? It's we're paving the path forward, and so I think all these different things, these different tools, just can add it to the toolbox. So yes, of course, that I would love to do that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for watching. If you want to share your story, just email us at hello@jasmingoodman.com. You all have a great rest of your day.